Just 2 years ago, this Texas football team had 2 players invited to the NFL draft combine and 0 taken in the NFL draft. This year, 11 players invited to the NFL draft combine, 11 players drafted.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, my thoughts on all 11 of our forever Longhorns and the destinations they went to in the NFL draft, and what I see moving forward in terms of their NFL career. And then in the last segment, the baseball team is heating up since that embarrassing loss to UT Rio Grande Valley, the first time losing to that program since 1971. The baseball team is 5-2. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I have no idea what's going on. I'm trying to, keep my composure. I'm trying to keep my passion. This is like the 4th time in the last 2 weeks I've had to re-record an episode. I recorded the episode today, thought everything was fine, and then I go to upload it, and there's an 8-minute chunk of audio missing. So, the first 9 minutes works just fine. Then the next 8 minutes, there's no audio. And then the rest of the episode, it's working completely fine. I did not touch the mic or anything at all, but for some reason, it decided not to record 8 minutes of my episode audio wise, right? So here I am recording over and over again. But, like I said, I think this is like the 4th time in the last 9 shows I've done where I've had to record it twice. So I'm trying to keep my patience, trying to keep my composure, but this is a lot. Nonetheless, we're here. Monday's episode, Locked On Longhorns. And like I said, a historic weekend for our forever Longhorns. They got drafted, 11 invited to the combine, 11 drafted, which is such a huge turnaround from 2 years ago. And you broke the record, right, for most Texas Longhorn players drafted in a 7-round draft, right? In 2007, in a 7-round draft, there were 7 Longhorns drafted. A lot of 7s there for my spiritual people and people that like numbers. This year, they broke the record with 11 players in a 7-round draft. I think the record overall was 18, but it was like in 1984, so it was before the 7-round draft. Nonetheless, the Longhorns made history this year. Just a testament to all these players, their families, all the work they put in, all the sacrifices they've made. It's a testament to this staff, right, and the administration for all the buy-in, right? They came in with a plan in 2021, and thus far they've executed that plan damn near perfectly, right? And now, even with those 11 players leaving, I believe Texas will be a national championship contender perennially in college football because you're bringing in the type of guys, right, that just went in the NFL draft over the weekend. 11 high-quality players, but also 11 high-quality persons, right, or people. I didn't know how to say that the best way, but 11 high-quality people that really helped transform this Texas football program over the last 3 seasons. So when you're looking at, the NFL draft, we had 11 players drafted over the first 2 segments. I'll give my thoughts on all 11 players and their destinations. The first one is Byron Murphy. And this was a weird draft because I think previously the record for most consecutive offensive picks to start a draft was like 7 or 8, right? And then they ballooned this year to 14. I think the first defensive pick was that edge from UCLA that went to the Colts at 14, right? And so that meant that Byron Murphy was one of the first defensive players drafted, but still went at 16. But that's where he was going, in a lot of mocks to Seattle. So it just made sense, and I'm glad it came to fruition. Also, I learned over the weekend that he grew up a Seattle Seahawks fan. Maybe I knew that before, rooting for the Legion of Boom and Bobby Wagner and, Michael Bennett up front, Cliff Averill. So hopefully, the Texas to Seattle connection worked as well as it did for Marquise Goodwin and Earl Thomas. Hopefully it works out for Byron Murphy as well. But just an elite prospect in the interior defensive line, somebody that can do everything at a high level, freakishly strong, freakishly quick, for his size, good pass rush, good run stopping, just incredible motor, right? Plays every down like it's his last down he'll ever play in a jersey. Just an amazing football player, an amazing culture setter at the University of Texas. And he's going to Seattle, which is a great fan base. Obviously the 12th man, I think they're going to really wrap their arms around him. Whatever he gives Seattle, they'll give him back tenfold. He's going to a defensive mastermind of Mike McDonald, who was the archetype or the architect of that Ravens defense last year. That was historically great, not just, best in the league last year. By some metrics, they were historically great, right? And Justin Matabuke, who was a defensive tackle under Mike McDonald last year on the Ravens, was an all-pro, right? He was one of the best defensive tackles in the league last year. And I think that that is the vision for Byron Murphy, right? Eventually being an all-pro type of player, that defensive tackle position. I think he's going to the perfect spot to do it. So really good pickup in Byron Murphy. I think every time he played at the University of Texas, he flashed, whether that was his freshman year and limited opportunity to his junior year when he was an All-American. But one of the best players we've ever seen on defense at the 40 acres. And I expect with just his dog mentality, his, incredible work ethic, and his physical tools, tangibly and intangibly, I think he's going to be a dog in the National Football League. Like he said many times at the University of Texas, I'm a dog, and he's not lying about that. The second one was Xavier Worthy, right? The Chiefs traded up with the Bills to pick 28 in the first round. They were at pick 32. Of course, they won the Super Bowl with pick 28 to get Xavier Worthy, who, was the buzz of the draft because he ran a 4.21 the fastest draft combine time ever for a 40-yard dash. Jeez, let me get it out. And when you look at Xavier Worthy, I think, obviously, speed, the Chiefs, like that comparison has been made since pre-draft, and it made just a little bit more sense than Byron Murphy. Like Byron Murphy to the Seahawks made all the sense in the world. I think this one was even more clear cut. Like Xavier Worthy, Chiefs perfect fit, right? You talk about Andy Reid and what he's been able to do with these type of receivers, whether it's Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Kadarius Toney, et cetera, et cetera. If there's anybody who knows how to use speed in the National Football League, it's Andy Reid, right? Then you're getting mentored by one of the best pass catchers of all time. Obviously not the same position, but I think Travis Kelce can teach Xavier Worthy a thing or two. You're going to play with a quarterback that is arguably the best of all time, right? So you're going to be catching passes from arguably the best quarterback of all time. I think anybody would sign up for that scenario. You're going to one of the best well-run franchises in the National Football League, and I think that matters, right? Sometimes really good football players go to bad situations and end up bad football players, right? He's going to a position where he's surrounded by greatness, and that should bring out the greatness in Xavier Worthy, right? And he's not going to a franchise where he can hide, right? He's going to a franchise that has a shaky wide receiver room, but also has Super Bowl or bust expectations every year, right? They're going to need to ride Xavier Worthy if they want to win another Super Bowl or three-peat, which is incredibly hard to do in the National Football League. I don't think it's been done since – what was the last team to three-peat? Did the Patriots do it? I can't remember if the Patriots did it, but nonetheless, it hasn't been done in a really long time. So, I think this is a great situation for Xavier Worthy. He's going to be counted on from day one to be a high-level receiver for Patrick Mahomes, and he's going to be counted on to be a high-level player for a team that's Super Bowl or bust, right? And I think based on what we saw at the University of Texas, Xavier Worthy has the makeup to be that type of receiver. Now, there were times where he had drop issues. He also had a broken hand that explains that. But there were also times where there may have been effort issues and an inability to play through traffic at 165 pounds. Going to have to play through traffic in the National Football League. So we'll see how successful he is at doing that, especially in a very cold environment like Kansas City. But like I said, he's going to the best environment in terms of a quarterback that knows how to get the ball to his receivers, one of the greatest pass catchers of all time, being a mentor, one of the greatest offensive coaches of all time, who certainly knows how to use 4.21 speed. So Andre Sweat definitely went earlier than I expected. I thought with the concerns about him being a three-down player, the concerns about his motor, and then obviously the DWI a few weeks before the NFL draft, I thought that would push him down to a third-round pick. But he was an All-American, an Outland Trophy player, Outland Trophy winner, the best interior lineman, offensive or defensive in the country, and he's 366, in terms of weight, but ran a 5.27, right? And so obviously the potential is there. The potential for him to just be a freak athlete and a freak football player is there. And I think this is a great destination, right? You could say that they drafted him a little bit early based on everything that was going on. But if he turns into an all-world football player, it doesn't matter where you drafted him, right? If Michael Penix Jr. turns into a great quarterback, it doesn't matter that he got drafted at 8. He's a great quarterback, right? I think that's a little bit overblown. And when I look at T'Vondre Sweat, I think Nashville is one of my favorite cities, but that's a great community. Like I said with Seattle, everything that T'Vondre Sweat gives Nashville, they'll give him back tenfold, right? And it's a big enough city, to where you won't get bored, but it's also not an overwhelming city like Houston, Miami, or LA where there's trouble all around you. I also think it's great for him on the defensive line to be paired next to an all-pro and one of the best in the league at his position in Jeffrey Simmons. There were a lot of people that thought that, him playing next to Byron Murphy every day sharpened his iron. I would expect the same thing in Nashville next to Jeffrey Simmons, who's one of the best defensive tackles in the league, especially with the retirement of Aaron Donald recently. So I think this is a great situation for T'Vondre Sweat, playing next to an all-pro, playing in a great city, and playing for a team that has a lot of pride, right? And the bonus is he's from Texas, Huntsville area. The Tennessee Titans are in the Houston Texans division. So every year, T'Vondre Sweat will play a game in Houston, Texas, very close to home, in front of his family, and that's got to be a plus for him as well. So love this spot for T'Vondre Sweat. Now it's time for T'Vondre Sweat to go out and validate the Titans, taking him earlier than most people expected. The next one is Jonathan Brooks. moved up to 46 in the second round to get him. Cowboys were talking a lot of noise about Jonathan Brooks, but there were no way that 55 players were going before him, especially what he showed before his ACL tear last year and just him being the consensus number one running back in the draft. And now I think he goes to a great spot in Carolina where they can afford to be patient with his injury, because let's be honest, that's not a playoff team this year, and that's not a Super Bowl contender this year, right? But he's going to a team with, Bryce Young and a bunch of new weapons where they're just trying to figure out their offense, and they're trying to figure out if Bryce Young is that guy. But based on what we've seen, at least thus far, it looks like Bryce Young, at the least, to be a great quarterback in the league, is going to need a lot of really good infrastructure around him. And what's the best, kind of security blanket for a young quarterback is a strong run game. And so I think, by the end of this year or next year, Jonathan Brooks will be the focal point of that offense, and I think he is a future all-pro running back, and he'll be in the conversation for best running back in the league within 3 years of being in the National Football League, especially when he gets healthy. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we talk about Adonai Mitchell sliding to the end of the second round, and then the rest of our forever Longhorns that reached their dreams over the past weekend. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. That's what FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time, right? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and get $20 off your first purchase using the code Locked On College on Game Time, right? To me, Game Time is the best ticketing app in the industry, and this is why. They got priority last minute deals. You save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. I can't tell you how many day baseball games I've gone to where I've bought the tickets on Game Time literally less than 2 hours before the first pitch. Flash deals, save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Zone deals, save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. All in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON College for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. What am I doing? All right, next on the list is Adonai Mitchell. He was the 52nd pick to the Indianapolis Colts. And, I think Texas fans are really going to be rooting for the Colts, for now and for a long time, because Chris Ballard came out and he had a fiery, press conference or answer about Adonai Mitchell, where he cussed multiple times. He apologized for cussing and then said, I don't really apologize for cussing, but he was just passionate. He just kept saying it's BS, right? Like, it was BS that Adonai Mitchell fell to the 52nd pick. And most of that, I think, has been attributed to a piece that was written about Adonai Mitchell that came out prior to the draft that seems to have some impact, right? I didn't think it would have any impact because it's social media, right? That's where I saw it. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, it's like 2024. It's the social media era. People put misinformation on Twitter and other apps all the time, right? So I'm thinking like these are real life people who have interviewed and met with Adonai Mitchell who are getting real life intel from the staff at Georgia and the staff at Texas where Adonai Mitchell played. So all of these rumblings about diabetes and him not being able to keep his blood sugar in check and him being a diva and, being hard to work with or vibe with at, in previous stops. Like, we never heard that at Texas. We never heard that at Georgia. Right. And so I'm thinking like, okay, this is just BS, right? Like, there's not going to be any stock into that. And then I see him fall to, the 52nd overall pick. And I see him, being taken as like the 8th or 9th wide receiver in the draft. There were wide receivers drafted ahead of him who Mel Kiper and the people on the set are literally saying he projects as a slot only wide receiver. So a potential number one that can play on the outside and in the slot if given the opportunity. Slots behind them, right? Like versatility. That's not a thing. Like, I don't get it, and, maybe Chris Ballard was so fired up because that piece had something to do with Adonai Mitchell falling. And you could see when he got drafted, like, he didn't even look excited, right? Because he probably was just had so much anxiety and was so overwhelmed by the fact that he was clearly getting drafted below players he was better than. But nonetheless, I think this will be a great situation for Adonai Mitchell. I think Indy is a great sports town. And I think it's hotter than ever right now with what the Pacers are doing. I think the Colts are on the up and up and had a great season last year. And then obviously with Caden Clark and Indiana, right, playing for the Fever, I think it's just a great time to be a Indiana sports fan or an Indiana sports player. When you look at this Colts team, right, last year, like I said, they made some noise. Obviously the Texans were the best team in the division, but I thought the Colts could have made some noise as well if they didn't lose Anthony Richardson after 2 games. But I think he's a future superstar in this league. In just 2 games, he showed some Cam Newton resemblance there. Really good running back, Jonathan Taylor. I think that line will get better, and I think they have a really good number 1 wide receiver in Michael Pittman. So Adonai Mitchell can step in and be a second option and eventually be the 1B to Michael Pittman's 1A. So I think that's a really good football team, really well coached by Shane Steichen. Excuse me, I'm messing up a lot. Really well coached team by Shane Steichen. And I think Adonai Mitchell will have a really good career in Indianapolis. And like Tavondre Sweat, right? Mo City kid, grew up about 30 minutes from where the Texans play, and now he gets to play a game every year in Houston, Texas, about 30 minutes from where he grew up. So, delayed but not denied, right? Obviously, draft night or, day 2 didn't go the way that Adonai Mitchell thought. He probably thought he'd be drafted by day 2 came around. But nonetheless, like I said, delayed but not denied. I think he's going to a great situation. And he has a chance to prove everybody wrong that doubted him this past weekend. Jatavian Sanders, 4th round, 101st pick. This is what happens when you have to record twice, right? But 4th round, 101st pick. Jatavian Sanders, I think that, over the course of his 2 years that he played at the University of Texas, he showed that he could be, one of the guys in that ilk that's the modern tight end, right? Somebody that you can still rely on to block when you need to, but somebody that's just a mismatch problem in the offensive receiving game, right? Whether it's against DBs, they're too big, too physical, whether it's against, linebackers or even defensive linemen at times, depending on how the defense is set up, they're just too quick and too agile, too explosive, right? And so you kind of create that scenario where you're a matchup problem against everybody you go against. So Jatavian Sanders looked like he could be that next player in the National Football League. I'll say looks, right? Because obviously he haven't even started his career. But I don't think necessarily he took the pre-draft process as seriously as he should have, right? Because if he did, then he would have known that he wasn't going to test well. He just wouldn't have tested, right? To run a 4.74 and then a 4.69 when you're, being marketed as a modern tight end, that's not great, right? And then at the tight end position, somebody who's going to have to play on the lightest line of scrimmage eventually, or at some point, you only do 8 reps at the pro day, right? And so that's the reason why we were talking about him as a potential end of the first round type of player. He goes in the 4th round. I think it's a good thing that he's going to Carolina because he's going, with Jonathan Brooks. And I think Jonathan Brooks will be able to hold him accountable and make sure that, Jatavian Sanders gets the most out of himself, right? Because as we've seen, he literally lost money because he was his own worst enemy, right? And didn't take the pre-draft process as seriously as he should. But he's also going to a very bad organization. All right, this is a bad organization in the Carolina Panthers. And sometimes, as I said earlier, really good football players go to bad organizations and end up bad football players. So hopefully, Jonathan Brooks and Jatavian Sanders can keep each other in check. Hopefully they can, hold each other accountable and both be great football players. But as we saw in the pre-draft process, Jatavian Sanders might slip a little bit, right? And hopefully there's great leaders in that locker room and great staff and an administration there to, prop him up and get the best out of him. Because like I said, I think he can be one of the best tight ends in the National Football League, but it's going to take a step up in mentality and intangibles from Jatavian Sanders to get there. And I just don't think he presented himself in the best way in the pre-draft process. And he paid for it getting drafted in the 4th round when he's easily a second-round talent. Christian Jones, one of the best development stories in, University of Texas history, went from being a liability at times, unplayable at times in college, to being a 5th-round pick, and I think, a viable piece of the future for this, Arizona Cardinals football team. They had 11 draft picks, and what we saw the, Houston Texans do last year, I think the Arizona Cardinals can do over the next few years, especially when you have a franchise quarterback in Kyler Murray, who I think is maturing and will get better. You got an all-world receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr., who I think will be in that top 5, top 10 discussion in the next 2 to 3 years. And then you just got talent all around that football team, and they're really well coached as well. And Christian Jones can come in and play right tackle or right guard, whatever you need him to do. I think he can do it at a high level. So just great to see Christian Jones, the development story going from being unplayable at Texas to being a 5th-round draft pick. He gives all the credit in the world to Kyle Flood for the transformation of what he's been able to do recently compared to what he did when he first got here. But I think, obviously on top of Kyle Flood, he needs to give all the credit in the world to himself, right? Because he is the biggest reason that he went from being not even thought about in terms of these circles to being a 5th-round draft pick and a viable piece of the Arizona Cardinals' future. Keelan Robinson went in the 5th round. This was surprising to me. I did not expect him to get drafted, but he's just a culture setter and a hell of a football player and somebody that's going to make things happen, right? And somebody, regardless of his role, he's going to go out and do it at a high level without complaining, right? He was behind all-world running backs at the University of Texas, never complained, right? Probably didn't get as many snaps as he should have, never complained. Went out there and played on special teams, made tackles, made gritty, tough, blue-collar plays, right? And also was one of the best kick returners and punt returners in the country last year. And also he can put up 20 reps on the bench press. So, hell of some versatility there. Still didn't think that he did enough at the University of Texas to get drafted. Maybe he was overdrafted, but he's the type of player to prove everybody wrong, right? And he's the type of player that will look at 5-6 years from down the road and will say, damn, they got that much value out of a 5th round pick. Just love Keelan Robinson, love everything he brings to a football team in a locker room. And I'm no surprise that a team that sat down and interviewed Keelan Robinson said, you know what, we need to pick him up in the 5th round because there's a chance he won't be there as an undrafted free agent. So I love this for Keelan, and I can't wait to see his career in the National Football League. Jalen Ford getting to go home, right? He's going to a team in the New Orleans Saints where that community obviously is going to wrap their arms around Jalen Ford, especially being from there, and I think that's a team that's built their culture on the defensive side of the ball. You have some of the best leaders in the National Football League in Demario Davis at linebacker and Cam Jordan at defensive end edge. And I think that Marshawn Lattimore is one of the best corners in the league. Not sure how much of a leader he is, but he is one of the best corners in the league. So he, at some point leads by example. So I think Jalen Ford is going to a really good situation. A team that needs a linebacker, a team that has really set their culture on the defensive side of the ball and plays one way, in a city that is just going to embrace him from day one. That's really going to embrace their own. I think Jalen Ford, because of that, probably will end up a really good football player because he's going to a hell of a situation. Ryan Watts in the 6th round to the Steelers. I think this is a steal for the Steelers, right? When you talk about a football player, 6'3", 206 pounds, that runs a 4.52, 4.53. I still think that's really good. There's talk about him playing at safety, but we saw him play at corner at a high level in college, and he was not a liability, regardless of what some people want to tell you. He was a really good corner for us at times. Maybe long speed is an issue. That's why you put him at safety, but he was a better – I don't even know what I'm about to say. He was really, really good for us, right? Even though there were times where he gave us some big plays, I would say 80% of the time he was a really good plus corner for us, right? And I think he's going to be a really good defender for the Steelers, whether he's at corner or safety, but they have a great history, especially in the modern history, of utilizing safeties, right? From Troy Polamalu to Ryan Clark to Mika Fitzpatrick now. Maybe Ryan Watts is the next person on that list. And then Jordan Whittington going to the Rams in the 6th round. This just made so much sense to me. If I was cynical enough, I'd go find the clip, but I don't feel like I need to, right? I've been podcasting for 2 years, going on 3 now, so I think I know a little bit about football. But I said that Jordan Whittington would be the next Puka Nacua in the league, right? Not in terms of talent. I don't think that, Jordan Whittington will step in and break the NFL receiving record. And obviously that had a lot to do with Cooper Kupp being hurt. But I said just a player that just makes things happen, right? Not the flashiest in terms of testing, even though he didn't really test because he was hurt. He had the injury history. He's probably mostly a slot receiver, but he just finds a way to make things happen, right? And on top of the football, it's the leadership, it's the intangibles. I mean, I always go back to that TCU play where Quinn Ewers throws an interception and Jordan Whittington chases the defender 30 yards down the field, punches the ball out, and then Xavier Worthy recovers it, and Texas, scores on that drive and ends up beating TCU, and I think what was a close game. So, Jordan Whittington is just an all-world football player, but he's an all-world person, and I think more than anybody, I don't want to disrespect any of these other 10 players, but I think more than anybody, just based on what he went through, based on the hurdles he had to go through, I mean, injuries, getting recruited over, getting shifted up and down the depth chart, I mean, you name it. And he stayed at the University of Texas and showed Texas fight. He epitomized Texas fight from the moment he stepped on campus to the moment he left. And I'll be rooting for him wherever he goes. But it's no surprise to me that Sean McVay is the one that took a chance on Jordan Whittington, and he's the one that took a chance on Jordan Whittington being an exceptional football player. Because I said before the draft, he could be this year's Puka Nacua. And the fact that Sean McVay got Puka Nacua and Jordan Whittington confirms to me that he knows ball. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the baseball team, who, like I said, 5-2 over the last 7 games, playing some really good baseball right now. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. All right. Talking about the Texas baseball team. And, I think the theme for this team, all year has been inconsistency, right? You talk about the offense, and we've seen times where they've been able to score 10 plus runs and, hit 4 or 5 homers in a game. They've been able to do that in back-to-back games at times. But then we've also seen multiple times this year where they've been shut out or couldn't get anything going offensively. There have been times where they shut out a team for an entire series, right? When you look at that Cal Poly series, but then they also got blitzed, against everybody they faced in Houston. There's been times where the defense has been immaculate. There's been times where the defense has been questionable. So I think in all 3 facets of the game, this team has been really inconsistent, right? And I think that's why we've seen the highest of highs this year, but we've also seen the lowest of lows. But to me, right, this is the type of baseball team that still, right, especially with the standard of this program and the expectations of this program, could get hot at the right time, right? I think, a couple of years ago, I'm not just too keen on, the Ole Miss baseball program, but I would expect, right, 2 years ago when they won it, nobody really thought Ole Miss was a championship level team at this point, and they went out and got it done. And just the way that this Texas team is playing, their inconsistency, I think they can get hot, get on a roll, and, live up to that Texas standard that we expect this baseball team to do every season. And they've done that over the last 7 games, once again, going 5-2 in that stretch. The last time I talked about them on the podcast, that last loss was to UT Rio Grande Valley the last time I talked to them, which was one of the worst losses in program history, the first time they had lost to that team since 1971. Like I said, my mom was born in 1971. So at most in her lifetime, she has seen UT Rio Grande Valley beat Texas twice, and more than likely once, depending on when that game happened in 1971. When you look at it after that game, they got shut out 5-0 by TCU before outscoring them 9-1 in the final 2 games. So they're really 5-1 over the last 6. But I don't need to really get into the propaganda. After outscoring TCU in the last 2 games 9-1, they beat UT Arlington 11-0. Right, they lost the Friday game, and then they beat Oklahoma over the next 2 games by scoring 2 runs. So that shows resilience, right? When you look at it, Texas has now won 3 consecutive series in conference play and 5 series overall this year where they lost the first game, right? So in 7 different scenarios, they had to win the final 2 games of a series to win the series, and they've done that 5 out of 7 times. So obviously you don't want to lose the first game in a series 5 out of 7 times, right? Because that's not good. But they have shown resilience in terms of being able to go get those series, right? Or excuse me, not 5 out of 7 times. They lost the first game of a series 7 different times, but 5 of those times they were able to still win the series. But obviously you don't want to put yourself behind the power curve 7 times, right? We're not even finished with the regular season. But in those 7 scenarios, 5 times they've showed incredible resilience, still winning the series, winning those 2 final games. In the last 7 games, Texas is averaging 6.3 runs per game offensively, which is really good and also includes a shutout in that stretch. So if you took out the shutout, it's probably closer to 7 runs a game, which is really good over a 6-game stretch. Allowing 4.4 runs per game, which is good. It's serviceable, especially in college baseball. But there was a 3-game stretch where they only allowed 1 run, right? They shut out TCU, allowed 1 run to TCU, and then shut out UT Arlington in 3 consecutive games, right? So in those 3 games, you only gave up 1 run. In the other 4 games, they allowed 7.5 runs per game or 30 runs. Right, they need work, right? So that 3-game stretch was really good, but I still think over the last 7 games, the pitching has not been to the level we expected to, and that once again could be your Achilles heel when these games matter the most. And then defensively, they have 9 errors in the last 7 games. They have 9 errors in the last 7 games. Not great, but 5 of those came in 1 game, right, against Oklahoma. So if you take that out, then it's 4 errors in the last 6 games. That's a lot better to stomach, right? So the defense overall has been good in this 5-2 stretch and 5-2 stretch. And, like I said, I think they're playing some really good baseball right now. So, it remains to be seen if they'll be able to ride this momentum into the postseason or we'll continue to see the inconsistency we've seen all season. But nonetheless, over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, they've been playing really good baseball. And hopefully for our sake as Texas fans, it continues for the rest of the season. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am praying to whoever, right, that when I go to upload this episode after, that it got all the audio. Also, if you're still listening at this point, Thursday, Pro Football Focus will be on the podcast once again. Not Trevor Sickema this time. Another Pro Football Focus analyst will be on the podcast this week talking about the spring game for the University of Texas football team and talking about the 11 players that just got drafted from the University of Texas. Hook 'em. Peace.